Ba 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 bum. Do 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 do. Bum 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 bum. Hey everybody, it's time for Coffee with Scott Adams. And you know what goes really well with Coffee with Scott Adams? Coffee. I hope you have some. I'm signing on extra early just so I could catch as many of you as possible. I'll probably be on later today too. But first, raise your mugs, your glasses, your vessels, and let's drink. Oh, yes. That is some good coffee. You know what goes well with coffee also? Winning. So let me tweet that I'm on Periscope right now because somehow I've lost that automatic connection that I'll say on Periscope now talking about North Korea. All right, I'm going to send out this little tweet and then we're good to go. Let's see how much traffic we get in the next 30 seconds now that that's off. All right. Yeah, somebody says I seemed emotional after the news. Well, let me tell you something. I live in California, and North Korea's nuclear weapons are really real to me. You know, the risk is non-trivial. And hearing that, you know, there could be a solution at hand, you know, we don't want to get ahead of our optimism, but I think it's looking good, was a pretty big deal. And even if they just talk for 6 months and not much happens, it's 6 months in which I don't have to worry about being nuked. Now, let's talk about all of the interesting elements of this North Korean situation. The first thing I find interesting is the number of people who said that they predicted it. Have you seen that yet? A number of people saying that they predicted it? And I don't know what that means exactly. So it could be that people predicted that there was something good would happen with North Korea, which would be sort of generic. And I presume people would say it's because of the pressure, they're going to buckle to it. But here are the specific things which I've been talking about that I don't know if anybody else has, so you can fact check me on that. I assume some people have talked about some of this. The first thing that I said that I hadn't heard anywhere else, and I said this as recently as yesterday before we heard the big announcement. So before we even knew there was going to be an announcement, and you can confirm this in case other people are watching and they want to know if I'm making this up, you can confirm it in the comments. I said that things were going to happen faster than people expected. So would you give me the first claim that I said things are going to happen faster than people expect? Check. All right. If you go back further in time, I'm trying to remember who talked about the war against companies as opposed to the war against countries. Because I think we're at this point largely because President Trump set the table so perfectly by working China and Russia and the United Nations, Japan, South Korea. He worked all the allies until it was clear that that wasn't going to be enough. And he gave the allies a chance to handle things on their own, gave China several chances, but made it completely clear that with or without their help, this was going to happen. So there was no point at which the president depended on China. He simply gave them first try. And we didn't get the result just from that. But then he went after companies, and I don't know if anybody else started calling that as early as I did. I don't remember exactly when I started saying it. Maybe a year ago. Maybe more than a year ago. If anybody can remember, that'd be great. The other things that I think are new and that I did predict is I had been talking about complete denuclearization. And I don't know how many people who predicted a good outcome were also predicting denuclearization as opposed to some kind of a freeze or whatever. I don't know what other people were predicting. But as part of my prediction, I said that an essential element and a necessary element for denuclearization would be both a long-term plan for reunification, and those conversations, early conversations are starting about that, but more importantly, a security guarantee. Have we ever heard a security guarantee come out of the mouths of North Korea, prior regimes or this one? At any time in the past, have they ever said, well, a security guarantee would be just as good? Because that's very much getting to the Switzerland model. And for those of you who don't know, Kim Jong-un went to school in Switzerland. He knows what a neutral country looks like, and he knows it's an insanely well-run country. So there's no way that didn't affect him. And so it seems to me he has played this somewhat perfectly by building his nukes up as much as he could and testing it in public. He got his best best negotiating situation he could get, given the circumstances. But if Kim Jong-un actually gets security guarantees, he will go down in history as one of the great transformational leaders of all time. It's easy for us to focus on, just our own president and our own politics. But Kim Jong-un, if he turns this ship from, dangerous rogue nuclear country to Switzerland of the East, and it looks like that's what he's up to, it will be one of the great leadership moves. I'm not taking away from any of the bad things he's done, right? We all acknowledge that, the bad stuff is still the bad stuff. But you can't ignore if he also does something that's positive, even if it's done for self-interest. And, moving North Korea to a neutral country with security guarantees and creating some kind of a long-term roadmap for something that looks like unification would be one of the greatest things any leader ever did. You can't really take that away from him if he pulls it off. Now, he wouldn't be doing it alone. He'd be doing it under pressure, and, it's always hard to distribute blame or credit. Let's talk about Otto Warmbier. The following will probably not happen. But if it did happen, it would tell you that peace is here. And that's this. If Kim Jong-un said, we apologize for Otto Warmbier, and I think you'd have to follow it up with something along the lines of, I did not personally order that. It was a tragedy. We didn't mean it to happen. I've already executed the person who ran the jail, whatever it is. So something along the lines of an apology, but also saying, it wasn't me. I didn't order it. It did happen, and we've already punished the person who did it. Something like that, even a little bit insincere, would go a long way. Yeah, no, I know your people are saying, and I agree with you, that an apology doesn't bring Otto Warmbier back to life. It's a permanent stain. But in terms of knowing, where they are in terms of their mindset toward a lasting peace, it's something that they could give for free. It wouldn't cost him anything. It's literally just a statement, we apologize unreservedly for what happened to Otto Warmbier, but we've already punished the person who made that happen or happened under his watch. Something like that would be a good sign for working together in the future. An eye for an eye. Well, this isn't the time for that. Now let's talk about some more interesting things that are happening. You hear the critics of President Trump primarily saying stuff like, don't fall for the trap. Kim Jong-un he's just playing for time. And really what's happening is he's just going to keep building up his nukes while he's talking to us. Well, here's what's different this time. Now, you always have to be cautious about saying what's different this time because, we're all optimists, so it's easy to fall into the trap of wishful thinking. But it is unambiguously true that the following things are different this time. Whether it's enough, we'll find out. One thing that's different is the level of squeezing we're doing on their economy. So time is no longer on their side. Time is completely on the side of those dealing with North Korea, not with North Korea, because their economy is imploding. So that's different. We've never been in a situation where they already know that they can't win economically, that the noose will only tighten, it will never loosen. The other thing that's different is that we have a President Trump. And if you were to tell me, let's say a generic situation, and just say, okay, generically, we have a generic president, and the generic president is being asked by North Korea to ease up on the sanctions while we're negotiating, because he's promising that good things will happen if we give a little too. With a generic president, you might say to yourself, yeah, that generic president's going to want to get something good happening so much that they might go for that. And that would, in fact, give North Korea more time to develop, more nuclear weapons. But I can't see that happening with a President Trump. And the primary reason I can't see that happening is that he wouldn't let people criticize him for that. There are plenty of things that this president is willing to be criticized for, and he even talks about it himself when he says, I can take the heat, I'm used to taking the heat. And we do see him taking heat on lots of stuff, and he takes it very well. But I can't imagine a scenario in which a President Trump, the deal maker, brand, accepts giving them relief from sanctions in return for negotiating. I just don't see that happening. And he's signaled that he won't do that. Now, there could be sort of an in-between phase where there's some humanitarian relief of some sort. But the humanitarian relief would be the type that the moment you stopped it, their economy would dissolve because they wouldn't have any ability to sustain themselves. So there is a situation in this case where some amount of humanitarian something would not be the same as it was in the old days, because in the old days they would have gotten a humanitarian relief, plus their economy was not crippled in the first place. So they came out ahead. Now their economy is pretty much already collapsed, or it's on the edge. And the humanitarian relief would actually be humanitarian relief. So if it happens, and I'm not predicting it will, but it could happen under this situation without just being a way for them to stall for time. It is different this time. Here's what else is different. Kim Jong-un has reframed this as denuclearization is something he wants. Because he says, and we don't have to believe this, but all that matters is that he said it, because having said it, it becomes part of the record in North Korea as well. All right. So he said that his father had wanted to denuclearize, and that gives him an off-ramp. So it gives him a way to win while everybody else has a way to win as well. So for the first time, all parties involved have a clear path to victory. That's different. Every other time we've been negotiating with North Korea, the way it was framed is that there would be a winner and there would be a loser. When you frame it that way, it's tough to get a solution because nobody wants to be the loser. People will take a lot of pain rather than being painted the loser. Kim Jong-un proving that he's got lots of game, meaning that Kim Jong-un, you do not want to underrate this guy. All right? The moment you think that he's not an A-plus player, you're going to be surprised because everything I've seen from him suggests that he really has a grasp of the big stuff. So hate him if you will for the things he has done, but it's hard to fault him for competence because he does seem like he's competent. And he's now said denuclearization is a goal. That's never happened before. And by the way, from now on, I'm just going to ignore trolls who tell me that there's no sound. Because I finally figured out that's trolls and not real people. So you might as well stop doing that. Now, let's see, what else is new? The other thing that's new and interesting is the way CNN is attempting to cover this. Oh my God, is that entertaining? You have to watch CNN. If you didn't watch it last night, please watch it today. If you have CNN access. Watching Don Lemon try to make this go away was just cringely satisfying in a way. I don't know. It was like watching a car wreck. Attempt number one is to spend more time talking about Stormy Daniels than talking about North Korea on the very day that the biggest news, in I don't know, ever came out about North Korea. Now, of course, they covered the story, but they covered it with whatever negativity they could bring to it. It was just hilarious. It's just so hard to bring negativity to that. Now, by contrast, I saw a clip somebody sent around in which Erin Burnett of CNN acknowledged explicitly, and I'm going to paraphrase, but basically said that if we get a good result with North Korea, it would be hard to call the Trump presidency anything but great. Think about that. So that was Erin Burnett. So let me give full credit to Erin Burnett, because I don't think that's easy to say on CNN, right? There must have been a lot of eyebrows that went up all over CNN saying, "Oh, we wish you hadn't said that," but it is correct. It's unambiguously true that if President Trump gets a good result with North Korea, and it looks like we have a good chance there, you would have to call this a great presidency. You just would. He'd have to do a lot wrong to make it work. Now, again, getting ahead of ourselves because the signs look good for some kind of good outcome here. It is entirely possible that President Trump will have won 2 wars in 2 years. He would have beat, at least in a territorial sense, the ISIS caliphate. People will argue whether it was a real caliphate, but it was a real territory and they held it. That took a year. In his second year, there's a really good chance he's going to have North Korea wrapped up. And maybe before the midterms. So I'm asking myself, if he lasts another, if he has a second term, would we run out of wars? Because, I suppose he could still fix, the Israeli-Palestinian situation. Iran might be before that, or maybe that's part of the Middle East solution. But if you have a president who starts getting a track record of taking care of one war per year, if you have a war, you're going to say, can you do us next? You're solving one war per year. You've got a few years left. Can we get in the queue? So there may be some other countries who want to get in on this war solution stuff. Yeah, maybe Iran is next. Now, I literally feel sorry for CNN. And I actually mean that, because they're kind of committed to this whole Stormy Daniels coverage, and it does make them look ridiculous. Now, everybody gets a chance to look ridiculous. I certainly take my own turns. But today is not my turn to look ridiculous. Today is CNN's turn. I'm sure I'll have my turn later. I'll get my turn to be ridiculous. I'm sure. Now, can somebody tell me, somebody answer me this question. The first time I wrote about my 100-year plan for North Korea, which involved them giving up nukes for security guarantees, which is the current deal on the table, with a long-term plan for reunification. That was July 2017. I think it was last July 2017. And the situation looks like it's going to be so close to that, at least on the big elements. Some people are starting to ask me on Twitter if I'm causing it or I'm predicting it. So let me ask you, because the fun part of this, if you read my book, Win Bigly, you have more context for this. So this sounds completely ridiculous out of context. So let me put some context on it. Part of the context of Win Bigly was that we humans cannot really identify reality very effectively. You can see that in the country right now, where there are two movies playing on one screen, as I call it, where half the country thinks Hitler got elected and the other half thinks, boy, we got a good president for a change. So these are completely different movies, but we're living what we think is the same reality, but we're interpreting it completely differently. Now, my take is that the only way you can determine truth, as close as we can get with our imperfect minds, is that the reality that predicts best is probably the truest. So if you predicted that Trump was, or if you imagine Trump was Hitler, nothing that's happened so far quite fits that. You'd have to force stuff in there and say, well, he's doing some Hitler stuff, but you really have to, you'd have to dig pretty deep to find anything that supported your theory that he was a monster. Whereas the theory that he was a master persuader, which is my theory since 2015, would suggest that he alone could get good success with ISIS, because persuasion was a big part of his battle plan, right? Telling them that he would never leave and he was going to annihilate them, and changing the rules of engagement. That's all in sort of the persuasion part of war. And North Korea looks like a persuasion play that would be perfectly predicted by he's a great persuader. But it's not predicted by he only has a brain stem and everything he does is stupid or lucky. All right, that's what the other side is saying. So you can never know exactly what reality is true, because we humans just can't do that. But you can certainly tell which one predicts better. And so far, the master persuader interpretation of reality has predicted perfectly for 2.5 years straight. It predicted he'd win the nomination, it predicted he'd win the election, and it predicted very unlikely things. Now, if I had been predicting things that were sort of obvious or likely to happen on their own anyway, then you'd say, well, that's not really a prediction. You're just predicting that people will breathe tomorrow. They're breathing today. That's an easy prediction. But when you predict that the guy who's never won a political race is going to win the presidency, when you predict that someone whose popularity numbers are so low becomes the president, and you predict that he will go on to do good things with North Korea, and then he does, those are very unlikely predictions in the sense that, normal people are not imagining those will all happen. So I would say that the persuasion filter has been very accurate. Now, part of figuring out what is real is seeing which predictions work the best. And here's the interesting part. There are two interpretations of my involvement, if you want to call it that. One is that I just predicted that we'd get this good result, and it looks like that might happen. It's still early, but it looks like good things are happening. So you could say one interpretation of reality is I'm a good predictor. The other interpretation of reality goes like this. It says that North Korea, we know they were sending their, let's call them agents of North Korea, were actually talking to Republicans and trying to figure out as much as they could about how President Trump operates. How does he think? How do Americans think? How do Republicans think? How does President Trump think? So we know, that's confirmed, that North Korea was scouring United States sources for opinions on President Trump. Now, one would think, if that was probably something like a full-time job for some people, that they simply had Google alerts and they were reading every article that was about North Korea. So I think it's fair to say North Korea had people who were assigned to read everything that was important and got a good Google rank about North Korea. Now, I'm in that category because my blog and my Twitter feed have enough visibility that if you were a competitive country and you were trying to figure out what people are saying about Trump, I would be in the top 50. So at the very least, I would be in the top 50 voices that North Korea would want to, be on the lookout for. Because I'm sure they would cover at least the top 50. And so it stands to reason that they've almost certainly read my thoughts on what would work in terms of a solution. It's also true that the administration and most of the major networks, news media, also follow both my Periscope and my blog and my Twitter. So those are all just true. So we know that the things I've written and spoken about North Korea have reached almost certainly all the right people, both in North Korea and elsewhere. Now, if you were to make predictions based on the two hypotheses, one is that I'm good at predicting stuff, and the other is I actually cause things to happen because something I've said or done has influenced the result. Here's the interesting part. They both predict. Right? So those two competing hypotheses, one is that all I'm doing is predicting, and the other is that, I had some ideas that actually influence the result. They both predict that we would be right here today, and they're completely different. So that's what's fun. is that if you can't tell the difference between two competing filters on reality, then wait for the fun part. If you can't tell the difference because they both predict, and they both do in this case, that's rare, but they both do, you can treat both of them as if they're real until one of them becomes false. In other words, you can just say that both of those realities work. You could actually treat it as though I'm influencing events, and that reality would make sense according to the facts that you have observed and might observe in the future. And you could say, nah, you're not influencing anything. You're just pretty good at predicting stuff. And that would put you in the same place. So both of those philosophies, let's say filters on life, they're equal. You could use either one. So you don't need to know which one is true because they both work. What if they both became false at the same time? Well, then that would give you freedom to pick a new filter, one that did predict better. Trump needs to have Jong-un to Mar-a-Lago. Well, you know what? My belief is that one of the big drivers of what I think will be a good outcome with North Korea is that Kim Jong-un wants to travel. Think about that. Think about being the leader of North Korea, and you're like, yay, I'm the leader of a whole country, but I can't leave. Imagine him watching, Western media and seeing all that we have over here. Imagine wanting to attend a Warriors game against the Cavaliers, for example, because that's a good matchup. Imagine watching that on, satellite or whatever he's doing and thinking, I can't be in that room. I could never watch that in person. But now he could. That now there is a non-zero possibility that he could travel to the United States if he played his cards right. Imagine what that does to your lifestyle, if he can get out of North Korea and just see more of the world. So for him personally, he's got a lot to gain. And, the people who said he'll keep his nukes because it's the only way to stay safe, I think that's the least way to stay safe. President Trump has changed the equation from if you keep your nukes, that's the safest you can be because we won't attack you. That's the old way. And he's changed the game because of his pressure on the economy as well as his unpredictability militarily. Those two things together have completely changed the equation. Assuming Kim Jong-un is rational, and all the evidence is that he is rational, and the evidence further says that he's beyond rational, he's pretty smart. All right, so we don't know for sure, but if you're just basing it on what we've seen, he looks clever. He looks like a very competent, operator. So if we believe that's true, he does know that he has a path to insane victory, like really big victory, and safety. He has a glide path to a turnaround situation for North Korea that would be just historic. Possibly a Nobel Peace Prize, but he could redeem North Korea. He could become a founding father of a modern reunified Korea. He could be part of the solution, and he could be the best of his line. He could be the most important member of his family, and that's in North Korea that's a pretty big deal, and he's on the cusp of making that happen. So that's pretty amazing. Pence secret server news. I haven't heard about that. How to explain the torture years. Yeah, so if North Korea tries to join the community of nations, there's going to have to be some kind of unpleasant forgiveness. He's probably going to need some kind of guarantees that we won't prosecute for anything that happened, from that day to in the past. We can't forget his past, but we can't be dumb. All right? So we can't forget his past, but we can certainly find the best way forward for the United States. And that may involve working with him, and it looks like it will. I guess it helps that he's young. Yeah, it does help that he's young. He could rehabilitate himself to a large extent, and his children, we assume that his children have committed no crimes. Maybe they have, but we don't know about them. So he has the potential to leave, generations of his family that are safe and have committed no crimes and can travel anywhere they want, and probably rich. He could blame it on his generals. Yes, he could. You saw an article that Kim Jong-un has horrible health. Well, he doesn't look healthy, but it's hard to tell. No, I don't think the rods from God were part of the collapse of the mountain. All right, so I think that's all I have to say for now. Let's keep watching events. It's a very newsy week. We practically forgot about. Oh, let's talk about the steel and aluminum. I saw an article in the New York Times. I just skipped it. I didn't read it, but the essence of it was that the New York Times, whoever was writing this, was starting to realize that the steel and aluminum tariffs are about negotiating more than they are about a trade war. So as long as there are carve-outs, as long as the president is willing to negotiate better deals, and as long as people recognize that some of the deals are bad, you even saw Tesla's CEO Elon Musk agreeing with the president that we need to do something with China's automobile import structure. So the president is building support, and apparently I guess the public is very strongly on board with tariffs and trade wars. I hate to use the word trade war because it's too general. So the public likes it. Elon Musk, a big critic of the president, he quit as an economic advisor, but even he's on board. And even the New York Times is saying 300,000 jobs added. Did that just come out? Okay, this would be too funny. Excuse me while I check the headlines. Let's see if the jobs report. Jobs. I don't see anything on the. Oh, here it is. Blows away the estimate. All right, so this is breaking news. If you haven't seen it yet, so I'm just reading Fox Business. Jobs jumped by 313,000 in February, best since July 2016. Stock futures jumped by triple digits. Best job growth since July 2016. Unemployment rate remains at 4.1, lowest rate in 17 years. Job creation numbers for January and December were revised higher. It's like everything's going right. What two words describe... Yeah, there it is. There it is. That is the golden age. You're seeing it. You're seeing the golden age. You're also seeing stuff starting to happen on healthcare. So watch what happens in healthcare between now and the midterms. So, well, it is a bad day to be CNN. Just a bad day. Anyway, I will talk to you all later. And go enjoy your weekend. I'll probably talk to you again later today. We'll see. All right. Bye for now.